Hey, good morning, everybody. Short intro today. I have to actually run down to the store because apparently coronavirus has hit New Jersey last night. Of all the stupidest things that you can imagine happening, they docked some ship nearby and somebody has it, and now it's like a doom ship. And basically, what I'm expecting is for all my local grocery stores to be empty. So I'm going to try to keep this brief real quick. Today's guest is Doug Ernst, who did a excellent book called Soul Finder that we'll be talking about for almost a whole hour. We cover topics like faith and spiritual experiences and, man, just all kinds of amazing topics to me that perhaps, I don't know if it's interesting to other people, but I find that kind of thing fascinating. I hope you guys do too. And I don't know. I want to believe, and I'd like to believe, that my listeners are on the more mature side. There's a lot of immaturity going around in the indie comics industry lately, and I try to go deep with my interviews here. So, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is thank you guys for listening to all of these videos, or interviews, really. They're just audio. I hope you guys get a lot out of this conversation. I did. I'm not especially, in terms of religion, professed or practicing at this moment, but I think I share a similar background to Doug, and we got into some pretty interesting and deep topics. Real quick, I'm going to I haven't started doing this just yet, but I'm going to try to make a push for Patreon again. I have a Patreon, actually. Well, link will be in the description. And I haven't announced anything formally, I don't think, but my next book, my next comic, I'm going to be releasing it page by page as I'm working on it. And one of the ways you can read it as I'm working on it will be through my Patreon. And it's basically a glorified tip jar. So if you guys want to give me even $1 a month, you'll be able to see me working on my next book. And of course, I'll get into more details as I actually cook this thing. It's still in the oven. But anyway, so yeah, if you guys want to support me or support the show, more episodes, Patreon will be the way to do that in the future. And I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Doug. I want to make sure the file shows up. Okay, looks like we're recording. All right, this is episode 41 of PODLOMATIC. I've got Doug Ernst. Please introduce yourself, sir. How do we... I know who you are, but perhaps some people listening don't.
Sure. Well, I'm Douglas Ernst, and longtime people that have been following me for a long time know me from my WordPress blog, which I don't really do anymore. Got into YouTube, and ultimately that led into what we're going to talk about today, which is Soul Finder Demon Smash, my book with Timothy Lim and Brett R. Smith, with additional work by Matt Weldon, covers by Dave Dorman. And then some people know me just from Twitter. I work for a newspaper in Washington, D.C. I have for many, many years now. So, yeah, that's the short of it.
Mm-hmm. And yours is a name that I've heard for, it's over a year, I suppose. And then I finally got to read Soul Finder a short while ago, and it was surprisingly good. And I'd heard the rumors and everything. And of course, there's a million questions I want to ask about your research techniques and inspirations and all that stuff. But I guess first I should ask, how did you get interested in writing a comic?
So as I've said on my streams before, that I grew up, I basically learned how to read on Spider-Man comics. My brother used to read me Spider-Man, and my oldest brother, Spider-Man and Iron Man comics. And then my other brother got me into Daredevil and X-Men. So it was just one of those things where I was literally learning how to read on Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, and the Amazing Spider-Man and all that. So I loved comics my entire life. There was a brief moment, maybe like my junior, senior year in high school, I kind of checked out, but that was actually around the Clone Saga in the 90s. So I don't know. It was weird. It was like I was into, like, obviously like my girlfriends and stuff like that, but then also the Clone Saga, and I was just, so I checked out. But then once I went into the military after high school for a couple years, and then I got back into comics, and it was like really cool to get them mailed overseas to Germany. And then, like, that was like, I loved looking forward to getting my Marvel comics in the mail.
And it was Spider-Man specifically?
Yeah, I've always collected the Amazing Spider-Man and Iron Man a little bit off and then Daredevil as well.
What was it about those characters that specifically? What do you think turned you on to them?
Yeah, I don't know if it's one of those like chicken or the egg things, but I always liked when Peter Parker puts his mask on, he was able to kind of hide his fear with jokes and humor. And I've said before, growing up, whenever I would get in like stressful situations, I would smile. And my teachers would go to my mom and they would be like, "Your kid is annoying the heck out of me." Like I'll basically yell at him and he just smirks at me, grins.
Huh.
And then my mom was just like, "No, he just does that. Like he just, when he's nervous, he smiles or, whatever." But then through reading Spider-Man or something along those lines, it was just also using humor to hide, I guess, fear or something along those lines. I don't know. I haven't accurately psychoanalyzed myself enough as I probably should, but that was like kind of like the start of my love for Spidey. And then I was like a small kid, but I was kind of wiry and athletic, and so I don't know. There's all these like sort of strange things about Peter Parker that resonated with me, and then obviously anyone who like really loves Spidey, you love with great power comes great responsibility. That was just something that resonated with me. It was just one of those things where you just like, I don't know, turn it over. Like, what does that mean as you start to get older? And that resonated with me as well.
One of the, I mean, between Spider-Man and Batman, I suppose the common, a lot of people, they're favorites of a lot of people, I suppose, and I guess the main reason would be their relatability. They're sort of down to earth. I've always liked Spider-Man, for instance. I'm not a huge fan of any American comic, really, but the movies and a couple of stories here and there, he's very blue-collar feeling. His struggles are similar enough to mine where I can be, oh, I get that.
Well, he also, Aunt May. So I grew up, my grandmother actually lived with us when I was growing up. So she was basically like a second mother to me. My mom and dad both worked. So when I would go home after school, my grandmother was always there. And so she was kind of like my Aunt May, I guess. And so I grew up with, and then she would have friends over every once in a while. So like I grew up with a lot of old people around me and dealing with them. So I haven't unpacked that as much either, but maybe there's something with like the relationship between Peter and Aunt May, and then myself and then my grandmother.
Mm-hmm. Your story about the smiling actually reminded me of a friend I had, a Chinese guy, who told me about his culture over there, that it's expected actually to smile when, say, you're reprimanded. I remember once we were driving on a highway and he did a weird move where he got pulled over. And he got pulled over by one of those really strict cops, like a state trooper. And the cop was like, "Why are you smiling at me?" He was getting really nasty at him. And I was like, "Oh, dude, why were you smiling at him?" He's like, that's what we do in China when we're, when a teacher's yelling at you or something like that. And I guess over there, it's supposed to be a humility thing. Like you're not allowed, or you're not supposed to look people in the eye because that means you're their peer over there. Whereas in America, it's kind of the flip side, right? Like if you look in someone's eye, it's considered respectful.
Right.
But well, this has nothing to do with anything, but it reminds me because like I don't like looking at people in the eye either, but I think that's mostly because I'm shy. And it's very intense to look someone in the eye. And I guess smiling would be a way of, I guess, easing up on a tense situation.
Yeah, like maybe in subconsciously you think it's showing the other person that you don't mean them any harm or something along those lines,
Yeah.
but then culturally they take it like, "What are you mocking me? Or you think this is funny or something?" Or I don't know. But when I was a kid, for whatever reason, that was just what I did, and I was very talkative in school, and so I would get in trouble for talking to people. Not being mean or anything, but I was just like really like talking to people, and so I'd get in trouble for that, and then the smiling thing would happen.
Mm-hmm. There's a sort of there's a word I'm digging for in my head. I can't seem to find it. Like a discord, perhaps, of where there's a certain way I talk or other people talk it just doesn't seem to gel. Like in school, I would always try to talk to everybody and be friendly with everybody, and then for no reason at all, someone would snap at me, and I couldn't see it coming, and I didn't get it. Like, oh, I thought we were cool. Why are you being mean to me all of a sudden? There's an interesting, I don't know about personalities necessarily, but I suppose the creative personality, that's one of the things I'm always trying to study. The creative personality is sort of wear your heart on your sleeve kind of thing.
Right.
And then you get stung, and then you just go back into your shell, and it's like, I'm never coming out again.
Yeah, I don't know if it was because I grew up. I have two older brothers and I have a younger sister, and so my brothers, even though I love the heck out of my brothers, you know, if you grow up, they'll constantly mess with you. They'll constantly tease you. So in my household, you had to be able to deal with people picking on you all the time, or messing with you, or taking your stuffed animals and pretending like, you know, locking the bathroom door and like, I'm flushing your dog down the toilet.
Oh,
and
jeez.
all this kind of stuff. So it's like, I don't know, I got like kind of thick skin just from dealing with I've said this before. There was one Christmas when I was little, I woke up and my brothers, they tied me to the bed so I couldn't go down to see what like the Christmas presents are or whatever. So it's like, I guess I've deviated from the path or whatever, but it's one of those things where it's like when children have fights as, you know, with each other, I never really went into a shell per se because I was just so used to getting into fights with my older brothers and then making up like the next day or even like an hour later.
It's good training. I was jealous of that. I never had that kind of thing growing up. I was always the solitary type. So whenever I get into fights with people, I sort of treat it too seriously. It's like, wait, you stepped on my toe? I'm literally never speaking to you again.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things with I missed very much when I got older about the military is that guys could basically come to blows almost, or essentially like, I don't know, as close as you could get to fighting without actually fighting if you're like wrestling or whatever.
Yeah.
And then like the next day just be like, hey dude, and then just be like, fine. But like when you get out the civilian world, they don't have those sort of rules. And I don't know, but there's a certain kinds of guys I've always liked that they could kind of get in like nasty fights. And then sometimes the next day it's just like, hey dude, or something like that, and you're okay.
I suppose that's the difference between a verbal, what's the word? A spat, let's say, over long distance, let's say even over Twitter or something like that. There can be no resolution because you can't read each other's body language, tone of voice.
Right.
Even like someone typing something, you can read it in your own voice and put your own interpretation on it. So someone might not even be insulting you, or me, let's say, and then I'll take it as an insult. And then I get into, you know, all kinds of fights, and I can't like just put a hand on his shoulder and be like, bro, we're not fighting, right? We're fine. So it's interesting.
I've had that problem a lot. So just as people know me from my YouTube channel, I even post videos randomly on Twitter sometimes. I'm here with you right now, and the demeanor that I have right now, sometimes I'll get in a disagreement with someone on Twitter, and in my mind it's the exact, like, my voice is not going up, I'm not like shaking my fist or anything, but it seems like other people interpret it like I am livid and like steam's coming out my ears, and I'm just like, I always want to be like, what, go watch one of my videos. Like, my tone is exactly that I'm dealing with you right now. Like, I'm not nearly as upset as you think I am. So I like being able to actually, we mentioned looking people in the eye, like look at them and not be like, dude, I'm not upset. Like, I'm just disagreeing with you. I'll forget about it the second that we're done here. Like, I'm not going to lose sleep over what we're talking about right now. But on Twitter, people seem to think that, they, like you said, they infuse and inject all sorts of feelings and meanings that aren't even there.
I suppose a lot of it is projection. Or I would assume it is. There's a bunch of conversations I've had recently where it's like, why are we even talking? If you're mad at me and I'm mad at you, why don't we just stop talking for a while? And
Right.
sometimes it's like, no, I'm going to keep talking to you, you jerk. And it's, why are you wasting my time? Why are you wasting your time? Let's go. Life's too short to spend on this stuff. Like, go do anything else. Get a hobby. Do you have a hobby?
Yeah, I mean, arguing on social media, before you know it, all of a sudden 2 hours have gone by, and you're
Right.
like,
I
what
could
the
waste an
heck?
entire morning on. I'm like pacing, composing one tweet. Like, yeah, I got him. It's like, why? Who cares? I'd rather be drawing a comic. But anyway, I don't mean to talk about silly stuff like that. But speaking of comics now, for anyone listening, I'll put the link below in the description. If someone wants to grab a copy of Soul Finder, what's the best way?
Sure, they could just email me at douglasernst@douglasernst.blog, and I will usually get back to them pretty quickly. Just some guy did a review of the book recently, and so my inbox has been very busy, very full lately, but I've been trying to empty it out as much as possible. So I'll get back to them, and then we'll work something out. Tell them the price and my PayPal, and every once in a while someone's like, I don't like PayPal, and I'll work something out. If they email me one way or the other, they will get a book if they want one.
And I'm cheating for anyone listening. I've read the book and I enjoyed it quite a lot. And so I'll be asking questions specific to the book. I'll try not to get into spoiler stuff, but if I do, just warn me and I'll back off.
Yeah, I mean, it's been out for a while, so you just be like spoiler, and
Okay.
they'll be okay.
Well, it would be no spoiler for anyone familiar with it to ask about. Obviously, this is about Catholicism. The main character is a priest. I guess let me first ask, where did you get the idea from it? For it?
So that goes back into my commentary on YouTube and the blog, and just being not happy with the mainstream comic book industry, the stories that were being churned out. And there's this thing, speaking of, where's my, there's some comics. Hold on one second.
Sure.
All right. Speaking of comic books, so like Captain America these days, Ta-Nehisi Coates, these things where they constantly deconstruct the superheroes. Not so much Nick Spencer, but under Dan Slott, deconstructing Peter Parker. These characters, they don't really stand for anything anymore. Mm-hmm. They're wishy-washy. Sometimes you don't know who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. And I really just wanted to tell a story where it was good versus evil. And I wanted to have a hero who was a flawed man, like we all are. He's fallible, but he always strives to do the right thing. He's always trying to get his moral compass fixed on magnetic north. Mm-hmm. And I just felt like that was missing in comic books. And I was like, okay, well, how do I do that? Well, one way is to have demons. Demons, you cannot, they're evil. They're just straight up evil. Okay, well, now I need a protagonist. And I was like, okay, well, I like ordinary men who do extraordinary things. Like, it's sort of like an Indiana Jones sort of character. He doesn't have superpowers, but he does these things that are just above and beyond. He gets in all these sorts of situations. And so I was like, okay, that would be cool to have just a normal man taking on these demons that are exponentially, infinitely more powerful than he is. They're more intelligent. They're eternal beings. They're stronger than he is. They have access to realms that he does not have access to, but they can still access his own senses, all this sort of stuff. So if he could overcome them, obviously because he's Catholic, due to his faith, then there's lots of cool stories that you could tell. And then because he's a military veteran, so I'm also drawing on my own, it's like write what you know sort of thing. Because he's a military veteran, I was like, okay, well, that could open it up to all sorts of stuff. So he's a combat vet. He's well-versed with weapons. He's got a network of guys that are also veterans. You could get into all sorts of, again, Indiana Jones stuff. You could do supernatural. You could do horror. There's all these different genres that you could play with when you have combat veteran exorcists.
You mentioned magnetic north. What I guess that could be interpreted as is a sort of what is, if I point at a certain set of ideals, this is good. Obviously, a character like this would be fighting something called evil, right? But what is, according to you, and the faith and all that stuff? It's a very deep question. I'm so sorry to paint it so broadly. What is good? What is magnetic north, and what's the converse of that?
So, in the book, there's an afterword basically where I talk about striving for the good, the true, and the beautiful, and all these things that, at least in my faith, if you believe that Christ is living truth, truth itself, the absence of truth, then that's where you start getting into sin and evil. And there's a priest that I like, Father Ripperger, and there's a video, I don't know if it's a new one or not, but he's talking about truth is, he's saying there's a similitude between what's going on in your intellect and the thing that you are actually considering. So people that are able to actually, reality matches up with what's going on in their head. I don't know if I'm getting out too far off track, but essentially my character is always trying to find the truth. The truth is what matters to him. And people that are opposed to that in any sort of ways. And then obviously you could get into Christ being essentially love itself at like the deepest metaphysical levels. So the absence of love, these demons or people that follow the occult that idolize these demons, they are all about an absence of love. They're about an absence of truth. And I don't know. So hopefully I'm not like just going up too much on a tangent here. But
No. In fact, I would love to dig deeper, but I guess there are more questions on a slightly less metaphysical level that I would like to ask first. But I do want to come back to this, actually. I'm very interested. Not in the movie sense necessarily, but so one of the topics of your book, and I'm sure future issues, is the idea of, say, oppression, spiritual oppression. Possession, of course, you put a list. I don't have the book next to me, unfortunately. I should. There are multiple levels of, let's say, influence, including possession, but not limited to. There's opening yourself up to it, and then
obsession, oppression, infliction, infestation, and subjection.
Would it, not to ask about spoilers, but what is the definition of each of those?
So. Oh, geez. Probably the best way, because I would not be able to articulate it as well as, say, a priest. But we'll just say that there are essentially different levels that a demon can act upon a person. So full-on possession would be someone who, over the course of time, they've told so many lies. And that was one of the things in the book, where possession is something that happens over the course of a long time, typically, because your way of life, your lifestyle is basically bringing you into alignment with evil. So you will evil, you just open yourself up to that, and it's essentially what you want to do when you lie after lie after lie after lie, even little lies. You weaken your spirit and you open yourself up to these things. In fact, you are actually inviting them into your life. So the full-blown possession is something that's very, very, very rare. I don't know the exact numbers. I should memorize them, but we'll just say, like, out of every 1,000 people that go to a priest and think that they're fully possessed, or family members that go, it's like you might have like 1% who are actually possessed. But then there are these, so the demons could they could act on physical objects that are surrounding a person. They could basically put thoughts into your head. They have access to your imagination. They have access to your emotions and sort of things. So they could suggest things. But ultimately, again, that gets back to free will. you are able to reject it or not. And so then that gets into what you put in your head. They have access to your imagination. So garbage in, garbage out. If you're constantly viewing really despicable, disgusting things, they have access to that. They could conjure up these sort of images in your mind. And so they can play on that.
There's a musical term called sympathetic resonance, I think. Have you ever heard of that?
I am not a musician. My wife, she plays multiple instruments, but I do not. So I apologize.
No. I may not even be using the right term, but I think that's what it is. Once I heard that if you take a tuning fork and it's tuned to a certain note and you hit it, right, and then you put that fork next to like a piano string with the same note, it'll start vibrating along with the same note, something like that. So like the sound waves emanate from one thing and reflect in the other. And I once drew a comic strip about something like that, where there was an evil spirit whispering in the ear of an artist, "You suck at drawing, you suck at drawing," and then the artist goes, "Ah, I suck at drawing." And what you just said reminded me of that. It's like there is, and I'm not going to get into specifics necessarily of like spiritual stuff. That's for you to say, of course. You're the guest, so you can say whatever you want. But for what it's worth for me, it reminds me of the idea of someone whispering in someone's ear until it becomes true to them.
Right.
But they perceive it as true. It's not necessarily true. Like say, gosh, I've known so many people growing up where it's like they think they're unattractive, let's say, and then they start acting as if they're unattractive, and then they become unattractive. So it's not like, it's more of an attitude, really.
Yeah, there's basically the you behind the you. So there's thoughts that are swirling around your head all the time. But then if you think about it, like you consider the thoughts that are swirling around there. So obviously there is something with you hear the thought, you're a bad artist. And then you think about it, you're like, am I a bad artist?
Yeah.
Like it's different. So it's like, not saying that there's not a demon under every rock, as the Father Ripperger would say, maybe every other rock or whatever. But there is your own thoughts that are swirling around. But some of the thoughts, because people are like, do you actually believe in this in demons? And I'm like, yes, I'm Catholic. Yes, I'm I'm a practicing Catholic. Yes, demons are real. And so it's like not. So that's actually the challenge for exorcists is, a lot of people, they think that like anyone, like a possession or an exorcism just happens. And it's like, no, if you get to the point where there's an actual exorcism taking place, they have gone to psychologists, they have gone to doctors. This person has been on all sorts of medications. Nothing has worked. They've been to all sorts of doctors. The doctor's like, I don't know what the heck is up with this person. And then there's also other things that would come into that. There's I think it's like basically, I might get the number wrong. There's like 4 sort of criteria that needs to be met. So sometimes someone who's never spoke Latin will suddenly speak perfect Latin. And then so you would go to the doctors and be like, have you, has this person been speaking in Latin? He's like, yes. They have uncommon strength. It's like a 100-pound woman, and it takes like 3 burly guys to get a control of her when she's in these sort of states or whatever, having knowledge that people wouldn't otherwise know. So if I was speaking to you right now and I was like, George, you remember when you were 10 years old? I know what you did behind the whatever in the woods with your friends. I don't know what.
Sure.
And like, so there's all these sorts of criteria that needs to be met before even an exorcism would even take place. And some people just think that it's like, you just go down to the church and it's like, I need an exorcism. And it's like, no, you literally need to like sign a consent form, or there's all sorts of stuff that you have to do.
And of course, the stories in the comic would be, let's say, multiplied in terms of their drama and action and all that stuff. But I would imagine I come from a Protestant background, so I'm sure there are divergences, but there's also probably similarities in the sort of stories we've heard and that sort of thing. One of the things that fascinate me about this topic is that it's not, on one hand, it's very mundane. It's almost as if a person that's influenced in that way, they don't want to be found out in some ways, at least the stories that I've heard. Well,
I mean, if you were actually possessed, like I was saying, in many ways, you have essentially your will is in alignment with evil. So there's much of you that has become your life or something along those lines. But then many times there is often part of the person who they do not, it's like they've been sucked into this vortex or black hole or something. And it's so hard at some point in time, you're so in the muck of evil or whatever it is that's where the hopelessness comes in, where it's just very, very difficult to get out of that.
Well, there's the famous story of Jesus driving out the spirits from the herd of pigs and that sort of thing. Or no, it was in a person, forgive me, and then he drove them into the herd of pigs, and it was sort of like, just don't send us back. We'd rather be over there.
Yeah, well, I don't want to ruin the next script, but at the same, it's one of those things where you will have people, they will go to an exorcist and they will have it performed, but then they don't want to change their life. They don't want to change the lifestyle that actually opened themselves up to the possession to begin with. So it's like, okay, you've performed this, this demon has been cast out or whatever. And then it's like, okay, well, now we need you to actually show up to Mass on Sunday. Now we need you to actually take part in the sacrament of reconciliation, confession, or I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Okay, now we need you to stop going to prostitutes multiple times a month, or whatever the heck it is. Sure. And like, well, I can't do that, and so it's like, well, then you're going to have the same result if you don't actually change your life.
It's sort of like leaving a door or a window open. It's like, yeah, you got the animal out of the house, but you may as well.
Yeah. Or like if you're prone to sinful bouts of rage or something along those lines, and you open yourself up to that. If you're not able to show mercy and grace and forgiveness to other people, then again, it's like sin and demons. They're like cockroaches or whatever. Any sort of spiritual opening that they will find a way to get in there. Whatever it is, wherever your weakness is, they're gonna crawl in there some way, shape, or form.
I've heard it once described to me as, well, no, there's a verse of this. They're looking for a foothold, as if they're climbing a mountain, and they're just looking for like any small thing to grab onto. And forgive me for talking too much about this at length, but it has this subject is endlessly fascinating to me. But I'd like to continue if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm as long as you want to talk, I'm cool, man.
Sure. No, I also want to get people interested in the book, of course, but I am being selfish. I could talk about this for hours. So have there been, well, I don't want to talk about too much negative stuff in a row, but have you heard of any real life stories of this sort of thing? And you don't have to tell me any if you're not comfortable.
Well, in terms of an actual exorcism taking place, or have I read books of exorcisms, or have I met people that I believe are possessed or being demonically oppressed?
I would say firsthand experience, probably. Oppression definitely is, I would say, more common. But yeah.
Yeah. So I how do I say? I don't know. I'm trying to debate how much I want to say, but yes, I have met people in my own life that I believe are seriously, at least demonically oppressed. And I believe that I myself, years and years ago, was a subject of a demonic attack many, many years ago. And And then I've just had random supernatural things happen over the course of my life that wasn't necessarily demonic. I actually believe were actually positive supernatural experiences. So
Could I ask about that?
the positive ones or the negative ones? Which
Well, supernatural things in general are fascinating, but anything you want to talk about, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, there was around Christmas time. I was saying the rosary. This is pretty mundane, I guess, but still supernatural. I was saying the rosary, and I was downstairs in our living room, and as soon as I finished saying the rosary, on the Christmas tree there was one ornament. It was filled with ornaments, but I finished, and then all of a sudden I heard this like shaking, this back like shaking, and I was like, "What the heck is that? Is there like a little animal in that, like house or something?" And then I looked over, and one of the ornaments was just like furiously shaking back and forth, but it was only one ornament, and then it just stopped. And it wasn't like it like slowly like stopped, and it just boom, it just like stopped. And then I was like, "What the heck?" And I texted my brother. I like took a picture of it. I texted my mom. But my brother is the only one. He like responded, but like my parents, like they're Catholic, but if you get into stuff like that with them, they don't want any part of that conversation. I don't know what that means, but so some people
freaks them out, you think?
Yeah, it freaks them out. Or I don't think I've said this one before. When my grandmother died, again, I said I was really close to my grandmother. She was 98 years old when she died, and I was actually supposed to fly home. And it all happened very quickly. Like she was really good, and then like really fast. But anyway, I was supposed to fly home. I didn't make it. I had the ticket, but it was like Wednesday I bought it, and then like I want to say like she died like on a Thursday or something, and then my flight was for Friday. Anyway, my dad called me super late at night, and like it was like after they had performed, the last rites and anointing of the sick and all that. And I hung up the phone. And then after I hung up the phone, it like lit up, and it started blasting this sort of like Gregorian chant that like, I can't even do it. It would be silly if I started to try and do what it did. But like, I was like, what the heck is going on? I was like messing with my phone. I could not turn it off. It was just blasting this sort of like angelic sort of thing. And then it just stopped after like, I don't know. It felt like forever. It was probably like 30 seconds, but it felt like a minute to me. I don't know.
Neat.
And so, and then I checked my phone. Like, do I have any ringtones that are like Gregorian chants? Have I been to YouTube channel? Like nothing. Like it was just like the most beautiful thing I ever heard. And so then I've always joked that like God has a Verizon plan or something. Like I don't know. Like and that was something where it's like I would tell my parents, and they would just be like, I don't want any part of this, like essentially like ignore it. Like I don't know. But to me, it was I don't know. It was amazing. Oh, and then a couple days later, I had a dream that was like this high definition dream. It was like more real than reality. And my grandmother, I was in the room where my grandma's room, and she was dying again. And I went to her and I was like, I'm sorry I wasn't there. I tried to be there for you. And I'll try not to get emotional. And then she was like, no, it's okay. She's like, I'm fine. And she's like, I love you. And then I was like, I love you. And she basically was just like, I have to go. Like, I love you. And then I like kissed her on the forehead, and I woke up. And like my lips were like red, or not red. They were hot. It was like just my lips were like really, really like warm, like I had been drinking like hot chocolate or something. I don't know. And I was crying these like tears of joy because whatever it was, I don't know what it was, but like my grieving period like stopped. I knew she was okay because I had whatever the heck that phone
Sure.
blessing or grace or whatever the heck it was that happened. And then I had that dream, and I was like, she's fine. Like some people, you can mourn for years and years and years over a relative who dies, but it was literally days later, and I was like, no, she's in a good place. Wherever she is right now, she's gonna be fine. And so those are some supernatural things that happened to me.
That's really cool. I always like hearing stories like that. Like, I've always been, I guess, in a cheesy way, you could say like the seeking type. Like, I love hearing spiritual stories and what people believe and all the little nitty gritty details and stuff like that. So I have family who's Catholic and all that sort of thing, and I go to their churches. And I grew up going. Sometimes I would visit Greek Orthodox churches, and they're very different from, of course, Protestant. If anyone doesn't know the differences, of course, like Protestants don't like decorate their churches very much. There's not a lot of, I guess, formality, you might say, tradition, that sort of thing. It's a lot more casual. But it's fascinating to me to see, like I'll go to a Catholic church and it's, ornate, gorgeous. I went to St. Patrick's a while ago here in New York. Last year, that sort of thing. And it blew my mind how big it was. And
that's something where, getting back to the good, the true, and the beautiful is basically there's many ways to essentially come to God or start a relationship with God, but the beautiful is a conduit. When you see something that is just there's like an otherworldliness to it, where deep inside you're like, no, there is something more, there is something beyond us, because this means something, or there's a transcendent value or aspect to it. I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, but, I'm totally tracking with you. It's what I always think about is the order versus chaos argument, and not in the classic sense of chaos being like people running around in the street, but like the symbol of chaos is, let's say, raw material, like a bunch of Lego bricks scattered all over the floor. That's chaos. But then order is starting to take those bricks and arranging them in such a way to create something that you use those raw materials, like say atoms in a universe, and when they're combined in a very specific way, it creates something that otherwise didn't exist before and couldn't exist without, say, intelligence arranging them.
Right.
And I think this human instinct of the thing that makes us awestruck when we see beauty, like art or beautiful archaeology, architecture, and things that are beautiful music. That's why I love art so much. Like, I think it's one of the highest things that we can pursue as humans. But what always blows my mind, it rocks me, is this feeling of like my jaw is dropped, like that couldn't have existed unless someone put those pieces together in that exact way. And on the other end of that is why I can't stand postmodernism. It's this mess, the cacophony. It's the opposite of beauty and order and goodness. I think it's sort of looking at the raw materials of, like, say, even cooking.
Yeah, I would say there's an argument to be made that it is somewhat evil as well. I'm not a fan of postmodern things, as they glorify ugly, and they do away with standards and anything. I don't want to step on your toes here or whatever, but like, I'm not the artist, but I don't like this. When you go to the art museums and it's like a jar of piss can literally be called art, or I don't know. You've seen the jokes where someone just puts a pair of glasses. I forgot who it was. They were like, okay, if any normal Joe is walking by the Museum of Modern Art, or they're at the Louvre or whatever the heck, there's a fire breaks out. They're going to know what the art is and what's not, what you need to like grab and save. They're gonna run, like, if it's just a dog poo on the floor and then the person called it art for whatever, like there's like a name a politician's head is in it, like, no one's gonna save that, but they're going to go for the Mona Lisa or whatever. Michelangelo, like certain sculptures or whatever, like people like innately know what beauty is. I don't know.
I once heard a funny story at MoMA, I think, which I've intentionally never been to and I never will. Even though I live right next to it, is someone once like left a sneaker in the middle of a room and then sat on a bench and watched people ponder his sneaker. I'm like, are you? They don't know what they're doing. They just think they're being deep.
Oftentimes, you'll see they'll have an explanation of what the art means, and like if it takes you like basically like a book to explain like why this is meaningful or like why people need to get it or whatever, to me that's kind of like a red flag where it's like art that is truly beautiful to me, it just stops you in your tracks, and you, even if it's not like your style, you're just like, I know that is good, or you just feel it. I don't know.
I think even across space and time and culture and all that sort of thing, like what we would call art would arrest a caveman, stop him in
Right.
his tracks, and he would stare at it and contemplate it.
Right.
Whereas what we would call modern art is just mundane nonsense that only has meaning. One of their teachings, which I can't stand, is you have to impose meaning on something that doesn't have meaning. So you get to make up the story of why this is meaningful. And
Right.
I think that's a very dangerous sort of. One of the stories that I like to consider in this case is like there was a postmodern building where there's like staircases that lead nowhere and rooms that have no purpose and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the guys asked, I bet the architect didn't do that with the foundation though. So postmodernism has a lot of like, oh yeah, we actually, life is meaningless. None of this makes sense. But foundationally, they're still cheating by saying like, there is no order while using order to prop up that very argument.
Exactly.
But yeah, I love the going back to the churches thing, and even temples. Like I've been to Japan, and I wish I could go back and visit all these like beautiful temples and stuff. Like the idea of, because I want to ask you about your international travels as well. I'm sure you've seen a lot. What is it in the human heart that strives for beyond what we're seeing and touching? What is this craving to build monuments to whatever's beyond us?
Yeah, so I mean that gets into the faith stuff as well. So to me, it's hard for me to explain certain things outside of a Christian context almost, and it's like, well, if man is made in the image of God and God is a creator, we are going to be creators too. And so that is just basically built into us. We want to we want to build monuments. We want to understand nature and all these sorts of things. And so that's part of it. But in terms of like yearnings in the human heart, that gets into, there's a point, because we're finite beings, but there's a point where we are connected to the infinite, and basically the depths of your heart, this even gets into the second soul finder, but like the depths of your heart are infinite, and you have all these chambers that go on forever and ever, like on a metaphysical level, and people are always trying to fill up the chambers in their heart, but they try and fill it up with material things. You can't do it. It will never satisfy you. They try and fill it up with sensual sort of things, like whatever, whether it's sexual stuff or drugs or all this. It doesn't fill it. So as long as you were trying to fill something infinite with a finite thing, it will always let you down. If you think about the happiest moment in your life, like within like minutes or maybe even a day, like you're just like, that there's something more out there. It's like it fades. It doesn't fill it. There's a leak, or it feels like there's a leak. So you're constantly trying to fill your heart with the infinite. And again, from a Christian perspective, the only thing that could fill it is love itself, which is like living love and living truth, which is God. And so in many ways, subconsciously or not, the human mind and the human heart is always essentially trying to fill its up or work its way back to God, because that is literally the only thing that could satisfy what it needs and what it wants.
So it's like, in order to fill an infinite space, you require something that is infinite.
Correct.
I see.
You're much more concise than me.
No,
Yes.
it's totally. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what you
Right.
meant, because there's the idea of, I guess, going back to the subject matter of the book, and what is the desire of the entities that are oppressing the characters in the books. It's like, what do they actually want? And it seems like what they want is misery loves company. Perhaps is that a good summary?
Well, that actually gets into, so I wanted the book to work on multiple levels. So somebody that is Catholic who reads it, they're going to have a very different, in many ways, view of the demons and why they do what they do, as opposed to someone who has no introduction to Christianity at all. There was an interview. There was a review recently where the guy ended up ultimately liking the book, but I can tell that he was not very familiar with Christianity at all.
Mm-hmm.
He was even like confused a little bit by like the demons, and like you said, like what exactly are their motivations and those sorts of things. So in this particular story, this demon is basically the search for knowledge itself can become itself a false idol. And there's a reason why the Black Mass takes place in a library, because knowledge is good. We like, I love science, and I love learning. I love reading books. I'm always reading books or whatever, but it can become, when it becomes all consuming to you, then it becomes dangerous. That's the search for knowledge. You want to know all. And, so there's that element of it, but the demons, they actually they realize that the soul finders, particularly Father Redder, he's meant for great things. And so they're trying to essentially break his faith, because if they don't, they know that he will do massive amounts of damage to their plans, which is to steal as many souls from Christ and God as possible before their end time or whatever. So it's like the demons know that they're on a limited time. So there's going to become the judgment day is going to come.
Mm-hmm.
But before that day comes, their goal is to take as many souls out as possible. And one way to do that is to take a soul finder off the chessboard. And if you could break Father Redder's faith, then that is a very good thing to them. So that's why they focused so much on him.
I see. One of the recurring lines in the first book, Demon's Match, is "God hates you," something like that. That seems to be a weak point that they're trying to dig at. Do you plan to? Of course, you plan to explore that, right?
So, with Demon's Match, yeah. So with the demons, you're always going. There's certain sort of themes or arguments that are going to come up repeatedly over the course of any sort of series. But this one, I wanted to focus on the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Mm-hmm. I've said before, like, why do little kids get cancer? Bone cancer, these horrible things happen to them. Why do totally innocent people end up getting raped or whatever the heck it is?
Sure.
And so a lot of times atheists or agnostics, if you're writing a book that deals with Catholic heroic characters, I wanted to take on a difficult subject right from the beginning, that they would be like, well, if God exists, how come Father Redder, why was he a soldier who was blown up in an IED blast and his best friend died? Why did his father was killed in the line of duty as a cop and all this? Why does God allow stuff like that? And so that is something that I wanted to explore. And so for this particular character, the demons, their leverage with him was they're going to point to all these bad things. His mother is dying of ovarian cancer. And they're saying, like, listen, on all these levels, this God that you love, that you're trying to please, consistently is putting you through the gauntlet over and over and over. What kind of God would do such a thing to you? And so depending on the character, they're going to work at him from different angles. And so Redder, that was a good way to go with him.
I see. So trying to wear him out, sort of thing.
Right. Convince him that, yeah, this like this God that I love, trying to convince him that, like, yeah, maybe he's not a good guy. Maybe I should think about this, or step back, or I don't know, become agnostic or something along those lines. I don't know.
I see. Yeah, there's let's see. That reminds me of a lot of stories where they say, for instance, there's no new story out there, but there's new people. So what interests me especially about a story like this is not necessarily that, fighting demons. That's cool. And I'm sure a lot of people, read this book and they'll read it on that level. Oh, it's a preacher fighting. I'm sorry. A priest. Forgive me, I say preacher. Fighting bad guys and that sort of thing. But on a more intimate character level, it's sort of interesting to see, for instance, how somebody might become susceptible or believe lies, or how they even put themselves in a position where they are willing to believe lies and they won't consider that they're being told lies and that sort of thing. I'm interested, what I'm trying to say is I'm complimenting you. I enjoyed the characters especially and how they dealt with their unique problems.
Yeah, I wanted, like you said, I wanted to write it on a level where if someone wants to just see a giant king cobra go up against a priest, like they're like, yeah, that was cool, there's a king cobra. Not that I'm like mocking my own story, but it's like, if you want, that's like the basic level. If you just want to see like priests with crosses and throwing holy water and snakes and demonically possessed women biting the priest and all that's like, yeah, that's okay, that's cool. But if you wanted to dig deeper into issues like free will and even just into the church teachings itself, if you wanted to look into the Latin that's in there, oh, this is actually like a real, these are real prayers that are said. I just wanted it to be on kind of like I think Christopher Nolan is amazing at making movies that operate on there's so many levels to them, and everyone's getting something out of it that fits what they're after, or even their intelligence level. Because I'm not trying to be mean, but a stupid person, they're only going to get so much out of it. Someone with like a 150 IQ, I want to try and write something where the guy with a 98 IQ, he is just as happy finishing the book after somebody with like a 150 IQ.
I see.
And that, to me, like, I'm trying to challenge myself to do that. And I guess you can't always please everybody, but in my mind, it's just like, I'm trying to reach as many people as possible with a story that hopefully at the end of the day is rooted in good values.
One of the best goals for any storyteller, and I think you nail this very well, is the story will get better on the second and third read through because you know things and you discover things as you reread this story. Whereas I think a less, I don't want to insult anybody, but there are some stories that are just, they exist and there isn't much more to them than what you see on the surface level. But I appreciate that yours is, now that I've read it once and I've learned about these characters, I say, oh, now I can understand why they do some of the things they do. And I'm learning more.
One of the things that I loved when I watched Just Some Guy's review, he was like, on first read through, I was like, oh, Redder and his sister, she's basically an atheist, or she's more kind of new agey, or she's not Catholic, that's for sure. There's some sort of tension between them because he's Catholic and she's not, whatever. And then he's like, I went through and I read it again and I noticed, like, no, actually the tension between them is because he's not there for the family. She feels as though he's neglecting his own family duties. His family is they're suffering at the expense of the parishioners of the church or his other job. And then I was like, yes, that is the main, that when I was writing it, I wanted it to be like, yeah, that is sort of, but it's really, no, what happens when you have a job that takes you away from your family and your family needs you? But at the same time, your responsibilities to the community at large are also they're very important as well. Mm-hmm. And how do you strike that balance between caring for the people who are your immediate family members, but then also the flock that is the church, or if you're a soldier, your fellow comrades or brothers in arms or whatever. And I like exploring those sorts of tensions.
That reminds me of some instances I would hear about. Like, for instance, even in, biblically speaking, Jesus taught his disciples, maybe it's not such a good idea to get married and have a family. No, Paul said this. St. Paul, forgive me. Maybe you shouldn't get married and have kids because then you'll be so distracted. You'll be torn between your two duties, and they both require full-time attention almost. It's interesting to see a sort of, in the case of the priests in these stories, they're not married, and I suppose culturally speaking, there's been divisions on this in terms of Catholicism. Mm-hmm. But even just having a family, sister, mother, that sort of thing, they require things out of a person, let's say of this vocation, that even if you were married and have a kid, you would be so focused on them that you can't almost perform your job because it's so overwhelmingly difficult.
Right. I would imagine. And that's where, because there's a lot of, when people aren't Catholic, they'll be like, oh, why, a priest should be able to get married and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, there is something to be said of those who have totally dedicated their lives to God.
It's really exhausting.
If you have 3 teenagers at home and a wife, you will be divided in terms of how there's only so much time in a day. Again, you could have a kid that has leukemia or something like that. And so there is something to be said about individuals, whether it's a nun or it's a priest, who have said, no, my life, its totality is directed towards God, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And so these characters are definitely they are not married, and Shua, we will explore some things with him perhaps down the road, but he's the officer, and he is not married as well.
Mm-hmm. There's I wish I could just do an interview show where I talk to people like that who are so dedicated to what they do that they can't even find time to get married and stuff.
Well, it's one of those things where it could be even as an artist, like your vocation, you are an artist. Yeah. Someone whose vocation is whatever else it happens to be, a teacher, an elementary school teacher, or even like a garbage man or whatever. Like sometimes it's hard for people to understand what motivates, because there are things that I'm sure you do from day to day, or like that drive you, that would make absolutely no sense to someone whose vocation is not an artist. And so sometimes when I hear people criticize priests who are celibate or whatever, it's like, well, that was not your calling. So on some level, it's going to be difficult because naturally the human, biologically, we are inclined, we want to procreate and be with women. So it's going in many ways across the grain. So yeah, I do get that. But sometimes I feel like people are unnecessarily harsh and they don't acknowledge their own ignorance of the situation.
There's a Japanese concept. I think I talked about this with Tenepo a couple of episodes ago. The word ikigai in Japan. It's sort of a combination of vocation, mission, passion, your profession. It's all these things, when they intersect, it creates a sort of thing where it's like the second you wake up, you're thinking about this one thing. And then you go to bed thinking about this one thing. And it's almost a monk-like existence where you're so focused on doing whatever it is you're passionate about. Like it completely, you are that thing.
Right.
And I have immense respect for people who are able to do that sort of thing where, like even in my case with art, let's say, for instance, I'm going through a thing right now where I'm drawing thumbnails for a comic that I'm not even sure if I'll have time to draw it. Because I wrote this script and then I sat down to do the thumbnails and I thought, okay, it's going to be like a 65-page comic. And I'm on page 125 of the thumbnails. And it's just this little script, and it kept expanding as I'm drawing it. And I get up every morning and I just have breakfast, and then I go immediately to my desk, and then I'm at my desk. Basically, I work too much is what I'm trying to say. And I feel so bad because I have no time to visit family, because like, you know, work demands such attention that it's like I can't rest. My mind can't rest until these thumbnails are done, for instance. And then when those are done, I have to start drawing. And that's, you know, 8 to 16 hours a day. You know, I'm just joking, but like it's a lot of time. And when I'm not at my desk, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do at my desk.
Right.
And it's amazing to see people who really are so into their vocation that they just say like, I'm not even going to start a family. That's not me, but I totally admire someone who's got that kind of drive. That's a fascinating person.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's hard. Like I said, if you're on the outside looking in, it's always easy to pick apart like why someone is behaving in a way that you wouldn't, and it's just like, well, maybe he wasn't meant to have a family. Maybe the only person that can figure that out is that's between that person and God. Really, is that individual needs to look inside himself, and if I, again, this is from a Christian perspective, and pray for the discernment to know what God's plan for them is. And if it's not having children, then that's fine. And if it is, that's fine too. But to go around, if for whatever's going on in your personal life, it wouldn't be my place to really criticize it, because that's between you and the Creator.
I do see a lot of that. And I don't mean to keep you much longer. We've done over an hour, but I see a lot of that going on society-wise, of sort of, hey, I'm going to tell you how to clean up your room, but mine isn't clean. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like, why don't you just mind your own business?
Right.
Like, you're not living the way that I would want you to live if I were you. And it's like, why does this have anything to do with you? Like, especially in our profession, where I guess I have a chip on my shoulder about this, where people tell me what they think I should be doing with my career. And it's like, you actually have no idea what I do on a daily basis. So why are you even presuming to tell me? It gets on my nerves.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of times, and whether it's with YouTube or whatever, it's always funny when people will tell you like, well, you're not, if you should be doing X, Y, and Z. And you're just like, well, I didn't know that you were Professor X and you were able to know my motivations and what drives me to do you. Like, I don't even care about sub counts. Like, it wouldn't matter to, like, I don't need 100,000 subs. I started a YouTube channel because I had some things on my mind and I wanted to share them. And if people liked it, that's fine. Like, when 5 people were listening to me, I was perfectly happy with happy with where my channel is at. Whether 100 people are listening to me, that's nice too. Mm-hmm. But like, yeah, it's weird when people are just like, oh, or when whether it's like the crowdfunding stuff or like Soul Finder, and there were individuals that were criticizing more behind the scenes or whatever. It's like the dollar amount that I was making or whatever, and it's just like, I literally designed the campaign to like myself and Timothy Lim, we crunched the number. Well, Tim crunched the numbers to get it as cost effective, like bring down the cost for the customer. And we got it down to a $15 book that was 64 pages. And so, yeah, we didn't make as much money. I could have made tiers and all this sort of stuff. I probably could have squeezed out more cash out of the customers, but that's not what I wanted. And it's just like, if my primary motivation isn't maximizing profit, profit's nice, but that wasn't what was my primary driver. It was just making good art that I was hoping that that would resonate with people. I'm sorry. No, it just is so bizarre to me that people think that their idea of success has to be your idea of success, and it's like, it's not.
Yeah, I've noticed there has been that argument thrown around. And I also noticed that the people who prioritize, say, money's great, by the way. I'm not going to presume. They say, oh, you should be making this much money. They don't create books that I would want to read and or study. And the kind of people who just have this burning need to put out a book, whether or not even one person reads it, those are the books that I'm the most interested in reading. I think there's a certain passion, artistically speaking. I was talking to Tanepo about this the other day, of I need to make this book, and it doesn't matter if anyone reads it. I want people to read it, but I have this thing in me that needs to come out. And as an artist and a person who loves art, that's the sort of stuff I want to consume. I don't want to just consume something that's a product.
Right.
So
yeah, and well, to me, it's one of those things where, like, I am perfectly fine with Spider-Man, going at it versus Rogues Gallery or whatever. But at the same time, like, it's weird to me if someone would discount, like, a Soul Finder. And when I was writing this, I was like, okay, there are people out there that do not like Catholics. I'm literally putting a priest. He's got his, like, a little Roman collar on the cover or whatever. And it's like, there are no women in bikinis prancing around in my book. So it's one of those things where it's like, well, but this is the story that I want to tell. Yeah. And I can't just, I'm not going to put a double D woman on there, just because I want to make an extra $5,000.
Sure.
And again, I'm not even criticizing people that like comic books with big busty women. I grew up reading, Uncle Todd drawing MJ. I understand it totally. And also I'm a guy, so I get it. But at the same time, it's weird to me when people, anything a little bit more cerebral and like when they're just like anything that isn't going to maybe make an insane amount of money for whatever, any number of reasons why they like just kind of dump on it. And it's like, no, like, I don't know.
I've had this challenge throughout my whole life. The things that I enjoy the most, I never was able to talk about with, like, say in high school. I would read certain books that no one else had even heard of. So I would be the only person that I could talk to about that sort of thing. And I had to, as an adult now, I've come to terms with it. It's like, I'm just not going to meet a lot of people who are into the same things that I am. But your book is cerebral. And of course, it's fun to read as, just on a surface level, but it also has depth. And there's a lot to think about. So for anyone listening, I would encourage you guys to try and definitely get in touch with Doug and get a copy for yourself. I was asked to ask you from one Catholic to another. I don't know if you would be comfortable answering this. Are you giving anything up for Lent? These are light questions.
I was thinking about that this morning because my wife, she gave up meat for Lent. And so I literally I didn't like just make some sort of, so how do I say this? I've never liked holidays like Valentine's Day because it's like, if I'm doing my job as a boyfriend, as a husband, especially as a husband, I should be doing my best to love my wife and show my wife on a daily basis anyway. Mm-hmm. And so like Lent in a weird way is sort of like that for me, where it's like every day I should be trying to be a better Catholic man every day. So it's like at the end of the night, so like when I wake up, thank you God, I'm glad I'm still alive. And then like during the day, randomly say something very like good happens at work, thank you God, be gratitude or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the night, then I think it's important to take stock spiritually about what you did, what you said to people during the day, the thoughts, all of your actions. And so like, I'm like, well, if every day I'm sort of taking stock and being like, oh, I got to do a better job on that. I got to do a better job on that. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know. In my mind, I'm just like, okay, well, I could just pick a random thing and just say like, okay, well, I don't want to eat meat. like throughout all of Lent, but I've never liked New Year's resolutions. Like, to me, I like making something part of your lifestyle, and then just I don't know. I don't like diet fads or anything that feels like it's just going to be like a temporary thing. And then you could like in your head, you flip a switch and like, okay, I could eat meat again. Like Lent's over.
Right.
But also there is something to fasting, to denying yourself certain sort of, again, bodily sort of desires or those sorts of things. So I guess off the top, the short answer again is no. But every night I take stock spiritually and I'm just like, yeah, I screwed that up. Tomorrow I got to be better at that. And so I don't know. That's sort of my mentality for Lent. And then obviously, it's, don't eat meat on Fridays and those sorts of things.
Well, that's an excellent reasoning for not doing that sort of thing. In a similar vein, I always said, like, I never felt necessarily close to God, let's say, in a church, but if I go on a hike, I feel way closer to, I don't know, I'm more introspective and thinking about spiritual things. And what I like about what your answer was, and we'll go after this, I'm so sorry for keeping you over time.
No, I'm always happy to talk.
I love the idea of the type of person who, nobody's perfect, we always make mistakes, but if it's like a plane that's sometimes we'll be doing a nosedive by accident or on purpose. But I like the kind of person who's always pulling up, trying to improve themselves so that even if they make mistakes, they're trying to correct themselves every day. They're asking themselves, why did I mess up? Or how can I make myself a better person tomorrow? So I guess what I'm trying to say is just a compliment of I respect you for being that type of person, and it's surprisingly rare. I found a lot of people think that they're perfect.
And no, I'm a sinner. I have plenty of bad thoughts, and I fail on a regular basis. I type things out and say things to people that are maybe too harsh or whatever, and lazy at times, so slothful, but to me it's one of those things where you want to be a better man today than you were yesterday. And even if it's just something like an incremental sort of thing over time, there's these sort of the virtue inches turn into virtue feet, and then all of a sudden you've gone like you've amassed a huge amount of whatever virtue points, or I don't want to say virtue points, just virtue itself, if you just make a little bit of progress every single day. And so if I got to just claw at like an inch of virtue or whatever it is, if I could just get that, then I'm happy.
Man, it's really fun to talk to guys like yourself that give descriptions like that. It's encouraging too, because I always want to try to do better, and I always screw up and that sort of thing. But it's great to see and to get along with guys fellow creators, let's say, who are always trying to be better than they were yesterday. That's something I really connect to. So anyway, it's cool to talk to you finally and have this conversation. I hope we can talk again when your next book is either. Are you planning to crowdfund your next book?
Yes. Okay. So I talked to Matt Weldon's the artist on the next book. I talked to him yesterday night, and he has the script for the next one. He's doing another issue of Punchline right now. So this could change a little bit, but the timeline is basically April is most likely when he'll probably start on the next Soul Finder, and then it's all a matter of when he's done. I want him to have as much time as he needs to do his thing. And then, I don't know, as long as a book gets out in 2020, that's all I care about. And so I'm not about like, we got to launch a campaign in May and, deliver by June or July. Like, I don't care. As long as it's 2020, people be like, oh, he released a book in 2019. He released one in 2020. He's doing another one in 2021. Then I'm happy.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I would say let me know definitely next time when you launch it, and we'll do some promotion. Maybe you want to jump on. We'll talk again.
Yeah, and if there's any other random sort of just philosophical or cultural topics you want to talk about, I'm always happy to just shoot the breeze or
Of
whatever.
course. I can't promise anyone listening that it'll be interesting for anyone else besides us, but I love that. I love talking about that sort of thing.
Sure, man.
All right, man. So I'll put again links in the description for getting in touch with Doug. If you want to grab a copy of this book, I do recommend it. All right, man. Is there anything else you want to plug before we go?
No, I just want to say thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed speaking with you and hope we could do it again. And you're welcome on my channel in the future with any projects that you have. And like I said, oh, you had mentioned earlier, if anyone wants a book, Douglas Ernst at douglasernst.blog. I have copies, and I am happy to get them out to people.